Look, Minister, you're welcome to the House. I think this is the first time I've addressed you since you were appointed to this role, so it's good to have you here. I want to start by saying I have no time for the Israelis and what they have done. I want to compliment the Irish government for taking their position to support the South African case. I think what's going on in Israel, and I might as well add in here Hamas and Hezbollah as well, the slaughter of innocent citizens is unacceptable on any scale. What Israel has done is murder on almost an industrial scale, and it is absolutely outrageous. With respect to the bill before us, I want to compliment my colleagues that brought this bill to the House. They brought it with the best of intentions. They brought it to bring to the attention of the Irish people, and anybody who's sitting in the Senate has had hundreds of emails over the last few days demanding that we pass this bill. And I would dearly like to be here speaking for the passing of this bill. However, passing legislation for the sake of legislation, or for passing legislation that has a name that might indicate that we had some control, would be wrong in every sense of the word. We've got to look at the wording of the bill, and we've got to look at the things they say. And first and foremost, the bill talks about the transit of weapons through Ireland. Where is Ireland? Ireland is our land, our sea, and our air. So the passage of weapons through any of those three would be unacceptable. Are we talking about just those aircraft that land and take off at designated airports in Ireland? Is that what we're looking at in this bill? Are we able to talk about those aircraft that transition through our airspace? It is no secret to anybody in this country that we are incapable of seeing what's in our airspace if the aircraft flying there have their transponders switched off. The government has taken steps to get primary radar in so as we will know in the future. But as of today, we have no idea who's up there. None whatsoever. Secondly, if there is a rogue aircraft up there carrying weapons or munitions through Irish airspace, how do we get up to it? What control have we over anything in our sky? The aircraft we have in this country are incapable of flying above 10,000 feet. So the bottom line on it is we cannot control our airspace, and with the best will in the world to you, Minister, you can issue all the dictates you want to all the countries in the world you want, and they can simply ignore you because we cannot see them up there and we cannot deal with them up there. We specify in this bill the transition of arms to Israel. What about places like, for example, Venezuela, Myanmar? Suppose somebody decides to send weapons to Myanmar, to the military junta that's there. Are they exempt now because they're not Israel? If we're talking about the transition of weapons and military equipment to some of these military juntas around the world, then we must include them all, and this is the flaw in the bill. We can't simply single out Israel because we don't like Israel. At the end of the day, any citizen in this country watching TV at night sees the murder and destruction that's taken place, and Netanyahu and his henchmen should be in jail, and I have no difficulty saying that. How, Minister, are you going to inspect aircraft that are transitioning Ireland at 35,000 feet? How's that going to happen? It simply cannot happen. I again ask, is there any difficulty in somebody sending munitions and weapons to ISIS so as they can use them in Syria or the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo? Have we decided that only one country in the entire world cannot send munitions through Ireland, through our sea, our land, or our air? And as I've said already, you can talk all you want about what flies over us, but we can't do anything about it. Now I want to talk for a moment about permissions that are granted by the Minister to allow aircraft to land. Shannon Airport has been a bugbear in this country for so long I can't remember. Aircraft landing in Shannon Airport, there are two types of aircraft that travel there with military people on board. Those that are on United Nations missions who are serving in peacekeeping capacity anywhere in the world, we are obliged, under the rules of the United Nations, and I'll deal with those in a few moments, we are obliged to provide landing for those aircraft, refueling for those aircraft, and the welfare of those that travel on those aircraft. Soldiers do not travel without their weapon. Their personal weapon is part of their kit. They travel with it. If they need an exemption to land there, then they get the exemption to land there. That's my understanding of it. And I see no difficulty with that. As a former member of the Defence Forces, I would not hand over my weapon to anybody. It's mine. And that's the way it goes. So I have difficulty with the exemptions, because the exemptions were taken, when we're talking about exemptions here today, we're talking about a macro exemption. We haven't broken it down to what exemptions are granted. Can anybody produce a record for me today that Ireland has granted an exemption to an aircraft to carry munitions into Ireland and then to fly on to Israel? Or are we talking about those that are on United Nations missions, or those that are rotating? We should be aware of the fact that there is a significant US military force in Europe, and they replenish those, or they rotate those military missions frequently. Are those soldiers allowed to bring their weapons with them? If they're not, they should be. It's part of their personal kit. So if the exemption is for a soldier carrying a weapon that does not have ammunition loaded into it, but it's his personal or her personal weapon, if we're objecting to that, then I don't see how that can happen. Our soldiers carry their weapons when they travel on aircraft. You might remember some time ago, we had 2 officers in the Congo, and they had to fly home, and the difficulty in getting them to fly home was they had personal weapons, and they couldn't carry their personal weapons on an aircraft at the time. So we've got to be a little bit careful about what we're talking about here. As I say, when we talk about those troops that are flying into Shannon, generally speaking, the Department of Foreign Affairs, or anybody asked about the transition of troops through Ireland, talk about the Air Navigation Foreign Military Aircraft Order of 1952, and subsequently the Air Navigation Carriage of Munitions and War Weapons and Dangerous Goods Order of 1973 and the 1989 Act. However, never do they refer to or cite the obligations Ireland has with regard to its membership of the United Nations. So we need to be a little bit more honest with the public on that, and that perhaps, Minister, is something you will take up in your new role. As a member of the United Nations in 1955, we have agreed to abide by the rules and the requirements as laid down as part of membership. So the bottom line on that is we have obligations there that we must fulfil. Now, there's been some discussion about Irish registered aircraft. We are one of the largest aircraft leasing countries in the world. Are you telling me, Minister, that in some way you are going to be able to put your policemen all over the world, and anywhere an Irish registered aircraft lands or takes off, you will have your inspection teams in those aircraft to check what's in them? It's an unrealistic prospect. It simply cannot happen, right? So again, we've got to be honest about what we're saying here. I fully support what we're trying to do, but trying to do it and passing a piece of legislation purely so as we can stick it up on the flagpole and say, well, we've passed legislation to ban and bar the transition of weapons and munitions through Ireland is simply not good enough. Now, when we look at the bill, I'm a little bit concerned about what I would like somebody to expand on what's the intended outcome with reference to Article 2.1b in respect of military items or dual-use items where there is significant likelihood that they could be deployed by the State of Israel, specifically by defining the limits and boundaries of the word likelihood. What's meant there? It sounds good, but what's meant there? What exactly are we trying to get at? When we look at Article 3.4, maybe I'll leave that, it's further on down in the bill. I have huge concern that we are using this House today to try and enact a bill that will have absolutely zero meaning if it is enacted. It will place obligations on you, Minister, that you cannot fulfil. It will place obligations on our defence forces that cannot be fulfilled under any circumstances. The use of Shannon has been already subject to judicial review in the courts. In the Edward Horgan case, I worked with Edward in my own time, and I know the honesty of the man, and I know what he was trying to do. But sometimes you simply cannot enforce what's unenforceable. Now, Minister, maybe I've got all this wrong. Maybe you're going to stand up in a few minutes and tell me that I'm talking through my hat and that you have a grand plan and you're going to introduce this legislation and you will make the hundreds of people that have emailed me over the last few days so happy. Not one word in this bill will save one Gazan or one person in South Lebanon or one Israeli or one person in Yemen or one person in Syria or anywhere else in the world, because we cannot implement what it's saying. I am desperately sorry, because I know my colleagues have put a massive amount of work into this. They have lobbied the public, they have put this out before the public, and hundreds of emails have come in here to support it. It is inoperable. It cannot work. So I think what we need to do is we need to go back to the drawing board with you, Minister, with your department, and see if there's something we can do that is implementable. Can we call on our near neighbours to help us in these cases? Is there something that we can do to prevent any weapons from anywhere in the world, not just going to Israel? I fully understand the situation in Israel at the moment. It sickens me every night to see what's going on. But at the end of the day, there are other places in the world, Syria, Yemen. There are people being murdered all day, every day by military juntas all over the place. This morning I spoke about Iran and the hanging of almost 1,000 people in 2024. We can't turn our eyes away from the rot that there is in the world, but let's not pass legislation that is inoperable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senators. And Gerard Lasca Hirlock, Agus Cogorba just also the first nua Amor Earth. Thank you, Senators, and look, a pleasure to be here with you this evening. At committee stage of this bill, and the reason this is at committee is the senators who sponsor the bill will know that the timed amendment has elapsed, and the government are not opposing this bill at committee stage. There's no mechanism to do that. I think there is more work, a significant amount of work to be done. I do want to address a couple of issues. Can I preface my remarks just at the start by saying there's nobody in this House, or no one that I know, no Oireachtas member that I know, is not absolutely horrified by what's happening in Gaza, by what's happening in the West Bank as well, by Israel's disproportionate actions and brutal actions. The tens of thousands of people that have been murdered, that have been killed by the IDF. And, you know, that has been articulated by members of government, by the Taoiseach, right the way through, you know, the last government also. And it is important as well that we condemn outright the brutal attack by Hamas on Israel also, and the savage murder of innocent civilians, the taking of hostages, and that has to be condemned outright too. And I'm assuming, and I know all senators here would share my view on that. I do want to make one general point, that the idea that the Irish state has done nothing or is standing by doing nothing is not correct at all. If I look at my time in the Oireachtas since 2007, we've had many, many debates and discussions, unfortunately, because the problems in the Middle East, and particularly with regard to Israel, the failing of previous peace accords and not moving forward with the two-state solution. And actually now we're seeing a situation where it is hardly even possible to see what viable Palestinian state could exist, unfortunately, at this stage, if these actions still continue. The Israeli bombardment of both Gaza, but also the continued attack on the West Bank, the continued expansion of settlements. All of those things are to be roundly condemned, and I've done so. Government colleagues have done so. We've done more than that, actually. And the idea, just from some of the commentary here this evening, was like the government have done nothing. And it's not correct. We've rightly recognised the state of Palestine. We now have a Palestinian ambassador here in Ireland as well. We've joined the case as well with regard, when many others thought that we weren't going to do that with regard to the South African case. We had to follow process. So it's not correct to state, in my opinion, and I respect all the senators who have spoken, that our state is complicit in some way, shape or form. We're not, in my view. And I think that we've been really clear, our people have been really clear, on our condemnation for Israel's continued bombardment of Gaza and continued grabbing of land in the West Bank. I just want to put a couple of items on the record of the House, if I could, because there has been the points made with regard to the increase in exemptions and trying in some way to, I'm not saying trying to link them, but there's been a correlation between, October 7th and further increases. So the initial Hamas attack on Israel, the Israeli response, completely disproportionate response, but there's been some correlation drawn about an increase in applications and indeed an increase in exemptions. And I've looked into the detail of these as well. And the applications for exemptions predominantly fall into two categories. And some senators have mentioned this as well. Like it's, US civil air operators contracted to carry US military personnel with unloaded personal issued weapons, which require exemption if they operate in Irish sovereign territory, including overflights. Now that's one major part. So including oversights at 33, 34, 35,000 feet. Scheduled flights in Europe by Irish registered aircraft operating outside of Ireland. So Senator Craughwell has mentioned, and he is correct, that if you look at Ireland being a world leader in the aircraft leasing, the registration of aircraft that could be flying between France and Norway that are registered Irish, that exemptions will be sought by some airlines because of the existing legislation that's in place, not coming through our airspace in any way, shape or form. And I understand completely the motivations behind what the senators who authored the bill are. But I do think there's legitimate questions to be asked about, if this bill was passed as it is, how we could enforce this. And I note as well that the specific mention of one particular country also, like we have a regime that's to deal with all armaments that fly through or are landed and flown onwards to other destinations. There's a regime in place that the senators know, existing legislation that is in place, but there will be a genuine concern about how this provision, if this legislation was passed as it is, could actually be implemented. You're putting a legal obligation on a state to do something that it can't do. I take very seriously, by the way, and when I say this as Minister for Transport, I have been in here on one previous debate as Minister for Transport, but also with my other department also, is that any allegations of breaching of the law here in Ireland with regard to transit of weapons are being investigated. I mean, I take them very, very seriously. Exemptions are granted in the main in the manner in which I've said, and we've actually seen the carrying munitions decrease from 22 to 23 and remained relatively static between 23 and 24, an increase of 10 additional exemptions in 2024. The most up-to-date figures that I have. There are matters within the legislation, and just to say as well, people talk about weapons going to Israel. Since October 2023, no exemptions have been applied for or granted for the carriage of munitions of war destined for a point in Israel. As such, it's unlikely that automatic refusal would ever be implemented based on what I have here at the moment. So there are certainly questions around enforceability. I think there are also issues, and department officials have looked through the bill. Minister Ryan, my predecessor, sought a timed amendment on this to allow further examination of the legislation. That is underway. I know at this stage, the committee stage will pass. Report and final stage then would be scheduled elsewhere. I cannot see a situation right now, as the bill as it's currently constructed, that it could actually be implemented or that could be supported in its current guise by the government. And I want to be very clear with you on that. And that's not a criticism of the motivations for bringing forward that bill. It's very simply in relation to the legality of the bill as well, that it provides that exemptions must not be granted if any of the three conditions as provided for are met. These relate to items destined for Israel, items with significant likelihood being deployed by Israel, and applications made where items are destined for or coming from a country which exports similar items. There is a lack of clarity and overlapping across different pieces of legislation, which could prevent provisions in this section from achieving the intended objective. No one wants munitions, and there's been no application for munitions landed in Ireland with a destination point in Israel. And I think we have to be straight with people as well, and honest with people. Senator Clonan has mentioned the reality of the size of our own sphere of influence and our own airspace that we have here as well, and that how one could even monitor and police that. Exemptions are sought, from time to time. They're published. Details of the number of exemptions that are granted are published. The refusal rate are published. I've outlined here to the Shannon that we're not seeing a significant increase between 23 and 24. All of them are looked at. They come up to the relevant section. They would be looked at where an issue is flagged and the reason for a refusal. That would be strongly considered by myself as Minister. I see no reason to grant an exemption for any munitions to be transported through Ireland to Israel. But there is a reality about how one could actually enforce this legislation if it were passed as it is. The exemptions granted by the Department of Transport relate to access to Irish sovereign territory and don't relate to the final destination of the cargo or its ultimate end user as it's currently constructed. So inspections of aircraft, there's obviously an onerous regime being proposed and put forward. We've got to look at the resourcing of any regime such as that. We do have within existing legislative provision the ability to be able to do that. That hasn't been invoked. It hasn't been necessary to invoke that heretofore, but the legal framework exists in this country for that very thing to happen, should we believe that that needs to happen. But there's a reality as well when you look at the exemptions that have been sought, that it is generally speaking, in the two categories, the vast majority of them, which I've outlined to the House. So the bill as it's currently constructed, government obviously procedurally won't be opposing the bill at committee stage. The senators have altered the bill. I understand the motivation behind it. I think it would be next to near impossible to be able to enforce the legal provisions that the senators would be asking the state. I think we've got to also be honest as to what level of this existing framework that's in place, like really is the level of munitions coming through Ireland that we could inspect, or dual-use items, as you mentioned. We have an existing legal regime. I think that needs to be used to its fullest, and our current legislation does provide for the inspection of civil aircraft, where there's an appearance or a likelihood that it will depart Ireland and it will contravene Irish law. So we have strong provisions in place. Where allegations are made in whatever publications, or if senators have specific information with regard to flights that landed in Ireland and were transporting munitions, they should be brought forward, and allegations that have been made already in the media are being actively investigated. But I want to be clear with senators as well, is the bill as it's currently constructed would not be, in my view, fit for it to be passed in its current guise, and would not be as it is right now, something that we could permit to go forward any further. We'd have to look at the regime that would have to support the new regulations or the new law that's put in place. There are other items which I will get officials to engage with senators on, in relation to where there might be some perceived legal contradictions, and it's not a criticism, it's just they have looked through it from the last Oireachtas to now, that I can certainly ensure that the sponsoring senators and the authors of the legislation could meet with officials in that regard as well. We could certainly correspond with you and highlight where those points are. But I do thank the senators for their contribution so far. Sorry to interject, I know there's other senators wishing to speak. The reason I wanted to speak is Minister Sean Canny is coming in at 6:30 for the remainder of the debate. So I could only attend for the first hour. So that's why I wanted to actually make my remarks and put them on the floor of the House. And as I said, we will correspond further with senators with regard to the items that have already been looked at, where we would see there being very significant legal difficulties with the legislation as it's currently construed, or constructed, should I say.
Look, Minister, the Senior Minister, before he left, gave oxygen to this bill, and thank God for that. I oppose the bill as it's currently written, and I compliment the Civic Engagement Group for the work they have done. Indeed, Frances Black has been a strong voice for Palestine in this establishment for as long as she's been here, and she's to be commended for that. I would ask that we suspend the committee stage and allow the engagement the Minister offered, because this bill needs to be passed. But it needs to be revised, it needs to be broadened out. I fully appreciate the situation in Israel. But what about Yemen? What about Syria? What about the other countries where there is genocide taking place every day of the week? There are men, women and children being killed in all of these countries. Why would we single out one country? Let's look at bringing armaments through Ireland for anywhere. It is wrong in every sense of the word. Indeed, when we offered our unequivocal support for Ukraine, which I fully support, but it never came before the Oireachtas to be debated. People talk about neutrality in this room.
Sorry, Chair, we're on section 2 of the bill.
Point of order, Senator Craughwell, please. Point of order.
Section 2, we're on section 2 of the bill.
Yeah, we are on section 2, and section 2 is about controlling armaments.
Thank you for your assistance. Just a moment, Senator Craughwell, if I just could clarify something. Now, as you're aware, the committee stage has been ordered for 2 hours this evening.
Yes.
Now, we may or may not finish committee stage this evening. It depends on the progress we make here within that 2 hours. This must conclude one way or the other by 7:32, I understand. Now, if it is concluded, as you're well aware and as other colleagues are well aware, and it passes, then we move on to report stage. So there will be an opportunity at report stage to make amendments if colleagues so wish to put down amendments at that stage that have not already been debated, or amendments that are accepted by the Cathaoirleach. So that's just by way of clarification. So I would ask that everybody will be given the opportunity to make their contributions without interruption, please. And we may get the committee stage finished this evening. I'm sure that's what everybody wants to see happen. Thank you very
much, Cathaoirleach, for the clarification. I want this bill to pass, but I want it to pass in a way that it can actually be implemented. And under Section 2, you're asking, everybody that spoke here today spoke about aircraft flying through our airspace. We can't see what's in our airspace. We can't get up to our airspace and force rogue aircraft carrying munitions to land in Ireland in order that we inspect what's in their fuselage. We cannot do it. So how can we pass a piece of legislation that is impossible to implement? At the end of the day, there is an offer here on the table from the Minister to work with department officials to make a bill that is passable, that is implementable. It would be wrong in every sense of the word to try and pass a bill that cannot be implemented in any way. And that's my point about it. I don't disagree with any person that has spoken here today. What is going on by Israel is absolutely inhumane. But we pride ourselves on being a humane race of people. And there are other countries where there are atrocities happening every day of the week. And those atrocities are being fueled by munitions that are transiting the globe. And at the end of the day, we can't turn around and single out one country, as horrific and all as it is. We cannot do that. We must protect all human beings in this country. We must have respect for all life, not just the life of Gazans or the life of those in South Lebanon or the West Bank or the Israelis that have been killed by Hamas and Hezbollah. All of them, as far as I'm concerned, are war criminals, every bloody one of them, and they should all be made answer for their crimes. But there are other countries, there are other women and children being killed in the world by the same munitions, manufactured by the same munitions manufacturers. We cannot control what flies through our airspace, so let's try and control what we can control. We can control our airports. Now, there's a section in Section 3 which I can't deal with at the moment, but there is a problem about inspections. But the bottom line on it is, and I'm asking, Minister, that before we let this pass out of committee stage, that we get your officials to engage with the Civic Engagement Group and make this bill work. Make it work. Make it be the flagship it should be for the rest of the world. But let's not pass a bill or allow a bill to pass through because nobody is willing to speak against it, purely because it looks good in the newspapers tomorrow, and purely because 300 and odd people sent me an email, and they will all email me tomorrow and wish me to be damned in hell for what I'm saying. But at the end of the day, we have to be realistic about what we're doing. We have to look for legislation that is enactable. We have to be able to enforce legislation, and there has to be a series of penalties for breaking that legislation. So I'm asking my colleagues to step back from the brink here, and let's go back and redraft this that it covers all eventualities. Thank you.
Senator Craughwell. Senator Higgins.
Minister, I understand why people want the committee stage to finish today, but my colleagues are long enough in this House to know that at committee stage we can thoroughly debate each individual amendment as it comes forward. You can speak as often as you want, for as long as you want, in order to drive home the message, in order to try and convince people of your position, in order to have a matter thoroughly debated and for people to consider. You also know that when we get to report stage, you get to speak once, and that's it. And each contributor can speak just once, and the person with the amendment gets to speak twice. That's it. So we do not have the same opportunity at report stage to tease out every single issue. Passing the committee stage today may satisfy the baying crowd outside of Leinster House that have been writing to us all week, but it is not going to do anything for this bill. This bill is flawed, and that's the bottom line on it. Let's fix the bill and pass it then. But please God, let us not go to report stage where we have a very limited opportunity.
The order of the House is that we discuss the committee stage of this bill today, and that if it is not concluded within 2 hours, that it is adjourned. That's quite clear. My hands are tied in relation to that, and I'm merely pointing out the facts of the situation.
I understand that.
But also, Laska Harley, we need to also point out that the Senator had an opportunity to table amendments today. This is committee stage. You had a week. So don't be disingenuous by standing up now trying to frustrate this process. You had a chance to put committee stage amendments here today, and you didn't.
Senator Ruan, please. Everybody is entitled to speak on the section.
On the section.
Including Senator Craughwell or any other member of
He's
this
frustrating
House.
the process, and it's clear for us all to see.
Just a moment, please. There'll be one chair here, and everybody, as long as I'm in the chair, will be entitled to speak. Okay? Now, if there are no other people offering...
I would like to respond, if I may.
Sorry, I have you to speak on the section.
I wish to respond. There was an allegation made that I'm being disingenuous.
Sorry,
I'm not.
Please, colleagues.
I am not being disingenuous. The bill needs redrafting. Amendments would not do that.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Okay. Section 2. Does Section 2 stand part of the bill? Is that agreed? Agreed.
Not agreed.
Not agreed. Okay. So the question is that Section 2 stand part of the bill. Those in favour say ta. Those against say nil.
Neil.
I think the question is carried. Section 3. that Section 3 stand part of the bill is not agreed.
I wish to speak on Section 3.
Sorry, you want to speak on Section 3? Right. Senator Craughwell on Section 3.
Thank you. Article 3(4)(b) of the bill cites the arrange for seizure of goods on board a contravention of this Act by the Defence Forces. Right? So an aircraft is inspected and the aircraft is found to have goods that are in contravention of the Act. What I want to know is, under what legislation specifically would this action be legally carried out by our Defence Forces? Where in the legislation have our Defence Forces got the authority to go into an aircraft belonging to a foreign country, seize goods that are in contravention of the bill if the bill passes? What legal basis is there for that? And if there is no legal basis for it, once again, I ask, how do we implement the bill? How do we action the bill if there is no legal basis for it? So perhaps somebody can enlighten me and tell me what the legal basis is for the Defence Forces to seize anything from anybody on any aircraft entering this country. I would also ask under Section 3, we've had a lot of discussion here today about aircraft that have been notified or have been granted permission to fly into or over Ireland. I would ask the Minister to bring back to this House details of the permissions that were granted, whether it was soldiers transiting to EU posts where they are serving, United States soldiers who serve in Germany, who serve in other parts of Europe, who are bound to bring their personal weapons with them. How many of the exemptions that were granted were actually for munitions to be transited to Israel? And one other question I would ask, munitions that are being transited through Irish airspace or through Ireland, if they're being transited to Germany, for example, what control have we got over those munitions once they arrive in Germany? What control have we over munitions? We've got to be really careful about what we're doing here. We've got to mind that we're not trying to enact something that is totally and utterly inoperable. So I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Minister, do you wish to comment on that section or those queries?
Just to say that I suppose, first of all, thanks to the senators. I came in to take over from Minister O'Brien, and I've been listening intently and taking notes. I suppose, as Minister O'Brien did say, this bill is not perfect. We need to engage with department officials. We need to see if we can make it workable. I also would say that you asked a question there, Senator Craughwell, about the applications for exemption. Predominantly, they fall into two main categories. One is for US civil air operators contracted to carry US military personnel with their unloaded personal issued weapons, which require an exemption if they operate in Irish sovereign territory, including overflights, or scheduled flights to Europe by Irish registered aircraft carriers operating outside of Ireland. Exemptions which issued in respect of the latter category have increased by 68% when comparing 23 to 24. This increased activity began in October 23. This increase is attributed to operational changes within the airline that resulted in Irish registered aircraft now flying in areas where the carriage of armed law enforcement personnel is a more regular occurrence. So there are reasons maybe for increases that we have to delve into. And that's why I think the Minister O'Brien did say that, it's like everything else. And I take on board what you're saying, what the senators are saying, and what you want to achieve here. I think that's important to recognise that. And I think we've seen enough of the destruction of human life that in Ukraine, and we've seen it as well over in Gaza. And when you have war, there's no winners, and everybody blames somebody else. But the people who are dead, and the children who are dead, and the women who are dead, that's not good to them, blaming. So I think we have a world where there's a lot of conflict. We have to make sure that Ireland upholds international law properly. And I think the Irish government have made statements in relation to the recognition of Palestine, which has to be acknowledged. And they did that against a lot of international pressure not to do that. So I think it's important we recognise that as well. So what I would say is, as the Minister did say, there needs to be engagement before this bill goes to report stage. And I do thank you all for your inputs. I know everybody's genuine, but we have to try and find something that will work. And the biggest thing with legislation, it has to be effective and it has to be workable. And if we do something with legislation that isn't going to work or is found to be flawed after it's passed, well, then we've done a disservice as well. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Minister.